welcome to my YouTube channel. My name is Sunshine Zee. For those who are here for the first time, you are welcome, and for the returning subscribers, shout out to you. I truly appreciate you. Before we start with today's video, I just want to mention that the subject matter that I'll be discussing today might be triggering. It's a potentially triggering topic, so I just wanted you to be warned. So when you do hear the topic, I'm going to mention it just now, and it's something that you might have suffered from, or something that you're still healing from, or you're not very comfortable with us discussing that, I really will not mind for you to not watch this particular video. I wouldn't want to trigger you in any way or just upset you. So make sure that before you watch the content, you are ready and okay enough for us to discuss it. What we are discussing today is the subject of shaming. As mentioned, this month I'd like to be raising awareness around various issues, and I thought I should speak about this because I think it's one of those things that we are not aware that we do quite a lot of, and I just wanted to raise awareness because it does tend to hurt people. It sometimes makes people very conscious of themselves. Sometimes people don't feel safe. I speak a lot about people feeling safe. And sometimes the reason people might not feel safe around you is because of what you might deem to be little comments or just jokes. But in essence, those things can be described as shaming. I would first like to go into the very definition of the word shaming. I think it's become somewhat of a buzzword lately, and some people might not be quite sure what it is that we mean by shaming. So I'm going to read the Merriam-Webster definition of the word shaming. Shaming is the act or activity of subjecting someone to shame, disgrace, humiliation, or disrepute, especially by public exposure or criticism. Okay, so it comes from the word shame. So when you are making someone feel humiliated or ashamed of that particular thing, that is what we refer to when we say you are shaming that person. So the reason I wanted to speak about this particular topic was because I feel that we are all guilty of this, and we do it so frequently and so subtly that we are not even aware of ourselves shaming somebody else. So I'll be discussing 3 types of shaming, and these are not they're not documented. I just came up with these. So and the first one is one that I think we do most commonly. As mentioned, I think we are all guilty of shaming someone. And the number one thing that we shame people for is behavior. So I call this behavior shaming, right? So what it is basically is that we shame people for being different to us. And I think sometimes we do it maybe because we don't understand why people do things the way they do them. So it can be simple things such as how people cook, how people choose to do a particular routine that we don't do that way. And I think the one thing that we need to remember, or the one thing that can help us address this, is something that personally I've applied in my life, and I'm still working on it. And it's to remind ourselves constantly, before you criticize somebody else, is to remind yourself that other people are not you. This has helped me tremendously in my own personal life, because there's just certain things that I would look at another person and say, why are they doing it that way? I wouldn't always criticize them directly, but it would be something that I didn't quite understand. But by saying to myself, listen, Z, not everybody is you. Not everybody sees things the way you see them. So that kind of helps me to understand that we are all different, and there is no need to shame people for their choices, their preferences. I mean, I've seen people shame people for eating in a certain way. I think, for example, I'll be a little controversial. I've seen vegetarians shame people who eat meat, you know, and I get that they're passionate, you know, about, you know, meat and all of those things, but it's one thing to tell other people about your views and, you know, maybe try and convince them to change their lifestyles, but it's another thing, there's a thin line when it comes to shaming. It's another thing when you are shaming somebody else for consuming something that you choose not to consume. And I think this is the most unfair type of shaming that we do, in that we basically try and say who you are, how you live your life is not okay, and we humiliate people for those things. And as I said, sometimes you don't understand, and it's okay not to understand it. It's okay to say to somebody else, maybe of a different culture, to say, hey, listen, I don't understand why it is that you guys do things in this particular way, you know. But it's another thing when you say, why do you do that way, you know? Why do you people slaughter animals? Why do you people, you know, like that kind of a thing, you know? Why do you do that? And I think also it's a lot in your face, as you saw just now. It's a lot in your face in how you're saying to somebody else, why are you eating worms? You know, it's in how you say it. And maybe, yes, you might be disgusted by it, but I mean, try and respect that that person is going to consume that particular thing. So, you know, you making a face about it, you might be humiliating that person, especially if there's other people around them and you're going to say, why are you doing that? You know, so be conscious of that. It's okay to be curious. I mean, it's you know, it's something that I recommend is curiosity and asking questions, trying to understand things better. But it's another thing when you are humiliating that person, when you are, it's in how you say it, you know. And as I said, we do this a lot with lifestyle choices as well. People choose to live their lives however they choose to live their lives, and you might choose to live your life differently. That's fine. Don't shame somebody else for choosing to live the way that they want to live. I actually have a personal story with regards to this type of shaming. So when I was growing up, a lot of people, okay, maybe not a lot of people, but some people would mention that I spoke very slowly. And I remember thinking, wow, I didn't realize that. And as I said, it's in the way people say something, right? So some people would say it in a, you know, I don't know how to describe it, but in just something that they've noted that, oh, you speak quite softly, or you speak quite slowly, right? The key word there being slowly. But there would be people who would say it in such a mean way, you know, and it was hurtful, you know, because here's the thing, I can't do anything about the fact that I speak slowly, you know, and it wasn't that damaging, you know, as maybe some of the other things that I was shamed for, which I will not go into in this particular video. But it was something that made me conscious, you know, and I think for the most part, that's why I was shy, or considered to be shy, because I was scared that if I said something, I would be saying it too slowly. And even now, I don't know if I still speak slowly. What I do know is that I'm over that, you know. It didn't impact me as much, and you know, I'm confident in how I speak, and in the way I speak, and the speed at which I speak. I think particularly because as an adult, I actually don't get that comment a lot. The comment I get is, you speak softly, and most people say it in a very complimentary way. So, you know, I think that has boosted my confidence quite a bit about that. So yeah, there was just a personal story about how I was shamed for the speed at which I speak. And I know some people are shamed for their accents. And I think it's something that I don't understand why you would shame somebody for their accent, because it's nothing that they can help. Actually, that means that they have knowledge of different kinds of languages, and we cannot always, I mean, sometimes language is a tongue thing, so we cannot always pronounce things in a way that, you know, is acceptable to you. Because I mean, if we think about it, who even makes up these rules? And sometimes you need to be careful in how you approach these matters. I mean, I think most times it's actually none of your business, and perhaps you should drink some water and move on with your life. But if it does directly impact you in some way, there is a healthier approach to it, besides humiliating somebody, besides you know, coming across as if you're looking down on them or making them feel inferior, or as the definition said, bringing them into disrepute. And I think we do this when we don't even directly discuss this with the person, but we rather go behind their backs and we say to somebody else, have you noticed how this person does this? You know, that's bringing somebody's reputation into disrepute, because you are now spreading this, and you know, people that didn't know this about that person are now noticing, oh my goodness, yes, that person does walk funny, or they do dress horribly, you know, things like that. I think let's try and avoid that kind of behavior, because that is shaming. The second type of shaming that I'd like to discuss is one that I think is the biggest. So behavior shaming, I think, is the most common and most subtle, but this type of shaming, I think it's the biggest one, and I think this one impacts people's confidence the most, and that is body shaming. I know, I did say that this might be triggering. Body shaming is one of those types of shaming that I think a lot of people have been subjected to, and it's also such an unfair thing to be shamed about, is the way you were born, you know. I mean, people are shamed for their features. How can you possibly change your features? Okay, plastic surgery. But I feel like we shouldn't even be going that direction, because if people accepted that you were born with the nose that you're born with, or with the eyes that you were born with, then people wouldn't feel so self-conscious. I actually recently saw another YouTuber share about how she felt about her nose. And I remember thinking, you know, I've watched this person's videos a couple of times, and it never dawned onto me that there was something wrong with her nose, simply because there is nothing wrong with her nose. But somebody made sure that they told her enough times for her to actually believe there's something wrong with her nose. And you know, I think she went and got a bit of work done, not necessarily cosmetic, but just, I think, fillers or something like that. And you know, I just found that to be incredibly sad, that we shame people for things they can't even change about themselves. We shame people for, you know, their skin tone. I mean, it's just things that I don't understand. What do you want people to do with how they were born? If they have a big forehead, why do you have to mention it? I mean, sometimes we really need to think about it. Why are you mentioning it? For what good reason are you mentioning the forehead? So unless it was something to do with you, which I doubt it has anything to do with you, their forehead has nothing to do with you, and you don't have to mention it. And I think, you know, as I said, I think people think that by saying something they are just being real. You know, I think we have this perception that I'm just being real, you know, I just tell it like it is, and that's fine. But there's some things that you don't need to be talking about, because you don't know the kind of damage that you are having, the kind of impact that this can make on that person's life, you know. And sometimes you said this maybe like when you were in primary school, and I mean, I know kids are mean, but sometimes we said things at that early age that people are still struggling with today, years later, people are still struggling with that. And I don't think it helps that as adults we still add on to those things, you know. I mean, let's behave in a mature way. As I said, if my ear does not have anything, I mean, it doesn't affect your income, then there's no need to be commenting about my ear, right? In fact, I think when you are tempted to say something about somebody, you'd rather actually turn that around and maybe make it a compliment, right? But I think that's also quite risky, because I think, you know, if you don't mean something, people can actually read that you don't mean what you're trying to say. So keep quiet. Once again, drink your water and keep quiet. And I won't even go into how we shame, especially women, shaming other women for our body shapes, you know, for, like I said, features. I mean, sometimes people have big feet, some people have tiny feet. And I think actually I need to talk about this. Once again, another personal story. So I have what people consider to be tiny feet. So I wear a size 3, sometimes a 4, right? And what I've found is that what happens with people with small feet is not necessarily the opposite of shaming, but it's like cute shaming, if I can put it that way. So it's a lot of jokes around, you know, people with small feet and their small sneakers. But what I find is that most of it is done in a very positive way. So I think it is some type of shaming if you really think about it. But it's not humiliating in that sense. It's just pointing at the fact that they have small feet. And on the opposite end, however, people with bigger feet have actually suffered a lot of shaming, where women with bigger feet sizes have been told, are you a man, and all of those kinds of things. And I found that when I think about my feet, it's almost like it's safer to have smaller feet, right? For some reason, I don't even know what is the perfect size for women, and why do you get to tell a woman what size it is? And also, once again, is there anything they can do about it? So you mentioning that they have big feet and that's a male size foot or whatever, how is it going to help them? What can they do about it? You know, like, it's not necessary. So really, when it comes to people's bodies and their features and things like that, things that they were born with, and that's how they choose to live. I mean, to be honest, there are some things that might not be healthy, like obese people, but obese people know that they are obese. So also no need to mention that. And unless you are their medical doctor and you're advising from a medical perspective, keep your mouth shut. Stop body shaming. The third type of shaming that I'm going to be discussing is called victim shaming. And I actually didn't know about this. I came across it quite by accident. And so what had happened is I watched a Netflix documentary. When I read it out to you, it's called American Murder, The Family Next Door. And this follows the case of Shannon Watts. Now, please be warned, this is quite a gruesome crime documentary. So it's not for sensitive viewers. And I had heard of this case, I think, when it was still... when Shannon was still missing and things like that, and the suspicion was on the husband, and a few days later they found out that it was the husband. Just to summarize, I'm not going to go into details. As mentioned, it's quite gruesome. So I watched this documentary, and what I normally do after watching documentaries in particular is that I'll go onto Reddit or Google just to see what people think of the case, or if there's any updates on the cases. I am a true crime fan, so it's something that I do quite regularly. But with this particular case, I was actually eager to find out if people were just as shocked as I was, because even though I've watched a lot of crime documentaries, this was rather a very particularly gruesome and horrifying case. And what I came across was something that I found quite intriguing. So I came across, I think it was a YouTube video where somebody was talking about how the worst part about this case is there's people who actually came in support of the husband who basically murdered his wife and kids, right? And they were supporting him, saying that it was all Shannon's fault. The wife, the murdered wife, was at fault because they accused her of being a bully, they accused of all sorts of things. And it is mentioned, even I think in the documentary, I'm not sure if it is mentioned in the documentary or on Reddit, it is mentioned that she was a rather, I think what you would describe as a strong character. And I mean, there's a lot of women who are like that. However, I don't think, I mean, you could be bullying, you know, and I mean, I don't condone bullying. You could be bullying your husband. You still don't deserve to be murdered. So I couldn't quite understand that, you know. So I went further into trying to understand why would people actually rally. And apparently there's people who have like Facebook groups where they support the husband to say he doesn't deserve to go to jail, because even though he's admitted to this, and if you watch the documentary you'll see how it is him, there's no way that it's anyone but him who murdered him. But there's people who are saying that, well, you know, it's her fault, right? And that is when I came across the term victim shaming. And I read an article about why it is that people victim shame, and it's quite interesting. So before you even judge, you know, people like, because I also immediately judged people, and I was like, how horrible are people, you know, like, do we live in the kind of world that people actually will stand up for the perpetrator and victim shame a person who's deceased? I mean, she can't even come and defend herself, you know. That's the worst part. But when I read this article, I actually put it into a bit of context, and I found myself sort of being a bit more understanding, which is, it basically explained that from a psychological point of view, people victim shame because they don't want to ever think that that could possibly happen to them, right? So when people heard this case, I mean, you can imagine a lot of people stay with their partners, you know, their husbands. It's horrible, but the only way they could process it is to somewhat protect themselves and say, well, but could it be that it was because Shannon was bullying him, or Shannon was, you know, was too demanding, or she wasn't a good mother, or she wasn't a good wife? And that way they are protecting themselves from the possibility of that ever actually happening to them. I just found that interesting from that particular case. But when you think about it, a lot of people do it even with sexual assault. People will victim shame and say, but she was wearing a skirt that was too short, or she went to the club and drank until 2 a.m. What was she expecting? So as much as that is cruel, I still believe that that's a cruel thing to say. Understanding it from a psychological point of view makes me a little bit more understanding of why it is people do these kinds of things, which is just, it's an instinct to try and protect themselves, you know. And I think we do this a lot, you know, even with certain things. We say, well, why did that person go there in the first place? You know, so let's say somebody went somewhere and something bad happened to them. You know, we victim shame and we say, but Naya guy, you know, why were they going there? And sometimes you find that maybe you didn't even want the person to go there. So say a bunch of your friends say they're going to a particular place, and you didn't feel like going there or whatever, and you try to say to your friend, don't go there, and they go there anyway, and they get a flat tire or something happens, and then you say, well, I told you not to go there. You know, you're not necessarily shaming, but actually if I think about it, you are shaming them for having chosen to go. So you're victim shaming them, so they are a victim, but you're still saying Unoya guy. I remember actually I once got my phone stolen. Well, not stolen, I was robbed. I was robbed. And the responses from different people, so some people were very, sympathetic, and I think that's the first thing you need to be, is sympathetic. But some people were like, why were you walking in the street in the first place? That's victim shaming. So come to think of it, we need to be careful even in how we react to a victim of something. I mean, you might have told them so, but it doesn't help for you to, first thing to say to a person who is a victim of something, doesn't help for you to say, where were you going? What were you doing in the middle of the night? I mean, you're discounting the fact that people shouldn't be stealing other people's cars. So if a person is hijacked in the middle of the night, it's really irrelevant that they were driving in the middle of the night, because, I mean, it's their car. They're allowed to drive in the middle of the night, We should be looking at the perpetrator, somebody who should not be feeling entitled to some people's vehicles or whatever the case might be. So let's be conscious of that. Rather use sympathy, or, once again, be quiet. If you have nothing to say that is helpful in a situation, you'd rather just keep your peace. That's all for today. I hope that you found this informative and hopefully not too triggering. I did say it might be triggering. If you feel safe to do so, we can discuss this in the comment section. We can talk about your experiences, or maybe some of the things that might have triggered as I was speaking. Maybe you were not aware of something that you were doing, and it constitutes that you were shaming somebody. So alternatively, you can use my other social media pages to DM me if you want to maybe just share with somebody in private. I'm available for you to maybe just share your story, because I know how that it can impact you, and impact your life. In fact, I also recommend that this be some kind of a journal prompt. You can journal about this and maybe review how you have maybe changed, because most of us adjust ourselves. Most of us will use makeup or just external things to try and hide those things that we've been shamed about, especially when it comes to body shaming. So are you finding yourself only wearing skirts because people were shaming you for your legs, things like that? So write about it, or converse with somebody that you can be open to about, and discuss these kinds of things. And I hope that it will help you in your journey to healing. My tip to you on how to counter the things that you've been shamed about is that you constantly affirm yourself and say positive things about those things that you might have been shamed about. And a good example is to use scripture. So, for example, the Bible talks about how we are fearfully and wonderfully made. And, it talks about how God, after He created us, He said, oh, this is good. So look at yourself every day in the mirror and say, this is good. Look at those features that people have shamed and say, you know what, this is what God created. I am uniquely made. I'm fearfully and wonderfully made. And, there's nothing I can do about it. I mean, there are things you can do about it, but you don't even have to go to that extent, just work on that. Those people told you things until you believed them. So counter it by telling yourself things, positive things about those features, those behaviors, those body parts, until you can believe it. I really do hope that this was helpful. Thank you so much for joining me and watching the video until the very end. Truly, truly appreciate it. Please do take care and be gentle with yourself. Love and light to you all.